think of a demand curve, don't think of this arbitrary thing in a book. It really represents consumers' willingness to pay. They're going to start jacking up price. They're going to offer prices higher than you pay. So price is going to start to rise. Eventually, some of these people that have tickets are going to start offering those tickets for sale. But as that price rises, some people who like Justin Bieber that didn't get tickets were willing to pay $25, the face value. They might have paid 26 or 27 bucks, but 30 bucks, they won't enter the market. So you got two things going on. This is the dynamics of supply and demand. As price rises, what are some consumers doing?
Leaving the market.
They're dropping, exactly, they're leaving the market. As price rises, what are some suppliers doing? People that have tickets. They're entering the market. Supply and demand, again, this is the invisible hand that you heard about, or Wikipedia. And that's going to occur until everyone that wants a ticket can get one, and everyone that wants to sell one can sell one at, this is the new market clearing price. Price is going to go up, and the market will clear. No shortage, no surplus. This is how markets generally work in the face of a shortage. Now, shortages tend to be relatively short-lived. Shortages tend to be relatively short-lived. I can't think of any shortage or surplus that has lasted all that long, right? I filled up my car with gas the other day. Premium. I paid what? $3. That's awesome. My car uses a lot of gas. I have to blend it with what are those little things called? The ones that they club in the baby seals. I have to blend it with baby seals. It's a special mixture. But we've been talking about shortages of gasoline since I was a child. When I was in elementary school, I was told the internal combustion engine would be a thing of the past, right? We'd also all be using the metric system, and we'd probably all be playing soccer. None of those things have happened yet, thankfully.
I have a diesel.
You have a diesel. Yeah, and diesels were popular at one time because diesel was cheaper. Yeah, actually, diesel is more expensive, isn't it? Yeah.
But I'm not combusting.
But it's still burning fossil. It's not any more environmentally friendly, is it? Diesel?
It is, in one way, the particulates are heavier and they fall down.
Oh, okay.
Adds
So they get into
less
the
to-
groundwater quicker. That's good. Don't waste time floating around. So we don't normally see these sustained shortages or surpluses. What's going to happen is price is going to rise, suppliers will increase supply, demanders will reduce demand, and the market eventually will clear. Now, in this entire article, when I read this when it came out, and I forgot how many years ago is this now, there's literally no mention of price in there, as far as I can remember, right? I haven't read it in a while. So this came out, and I've written articles for Wine Business Monthly before. So I wrote the response, and I sent it to Cyril Penn. You guys know Cyril? He's the editor. And Cyril said, "This is a little harsh. I don't know if we want to publish that."
Did you send it to the other author?
No, I don't know him, but I wanted him to read it like everyone else. I want to blitz attack. So I actually went back, and what you're reading is the toned down version. So what you're reading is the toned down version, but essentially, I apply simple principles of microeconomic theory. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. I don't run any fancy regressions. I don't do anything but answer the question, if there's a shortage, then we should observe some phenomenon. And the phenomenon we should observe is rising prices. If we're running out of gas prices go up. If we're running out of, what else has gotten expensive lately? Water? Yeah, if we run out of water, prices of water will go up. Is water going up? I'm not sure. But that's just fundamental microeconomic theory. It's not Nobel Prize winning, it's not anything fancy.
Well, there's usually more purpose to when people do things than why was that article written and why was it published, and then on the front cover, so proud
Yeah.
and bold.
Well, one, apparently he's highly respected. Like I said, he's, I think it's who I checked, it's a Harvard MBA. And he's well known in Napa. I doubt if he's well known outside of that. I don't, before I sent this to Cyril at Wine Business Monthly, I sent it to some grape brokers. And they thought it was a great article because they sell grapes.
Mm-hmm.
And they want people to believe that there's going to be a shortage, so they can sell grapes for more. So they actually understand the economics of it, but they hated my article. They said the same thing. Hey, you're kind of harsh. It's a little harsh there. And they kind of added some criticisms to, well, maybe, I don't remember what their criticisms were, but most of the criticisms were, it's kind of harsh. Did you think it was harsh? Yeah, it was kind of harsh, yeah. And again, this is the toned down version. I wish I would have saved the original version. And I sent it back to Cyril, and he's like, this is still kind of harsh. But I wanted, so I didn't end up getting published. But that's all I do.
As I recall from the article, he was trying to, like because of the shortage, he was hinting that prices would go up, or there'd be a squeeze on the wine sellers, not the grape sellers, but people who make wine, there'd be a squeeze on them.
Yeah.
But then from your article, it doesn't really show that. It kind of shows that if something happens, it's later. It looks more like the price of wine just has to do with maybe just the general economy, and they don't really care about if there's more or less grapes.
No, I mean, there's still, supply and demand matter. The problem is he looks at supply and demand and ignores the role of price, or, and one of the things he does is he says, look, here's my model that I did in the past, and I was able to predict shortages and surpluses in the past. And all I say is, okay, let's see. If there was a shortage in the past, we should see prices rising in the past. If there was a surplus in the past, we should see prices falling in the past.
Predictions will fall, right?
And so I just looked at prices in the time periods in which he said there were shortages and surpluses, and he's wrong every single time almost. I think he was right 2 at a time, 2 out of 10.
Yeah.
And what I said was, look, I can flip a coin and be better than that. So that's, and so most of the time it's not just like flat. It's like prices are going in the opposite direction of what you're saying. And all I did was pull grape reports, crush reports, and just graph the prices. That's it. And yeah, that was it. And one of the things that I point out is, even for areas like Napa, and some of the wine, and we went on this, even for areas like Napa that, let's say it is constrained, and prices, so let's say supply looks like that. It's constrained. I can't grow any more grapes. We're maxed out in Napa. There's still going to be a demand, and as demand rises, price will rise. The problem with this isn't necessarily the right model, because it assumes that, well, it's kind of right in one sense, in that no matter what happens to the price of grapes in Napa, and this was the criticism I got in the paper, that's the grape growers. I said, look, Napa's maxed out. We can't grow any more grapes. So prices are going to shoot up. And what I say in the article is that assumes that people that drink Napa wine only drink Napa wine and will always only drink Napa wine. And that's not true. It's not true. And I show perfect examples of situations and when that philosophy was proven wrong over and over again. Japanese cars entering the market in the 70s when gas prices went up. Made in Japan when I was a kid used to be a joke. Like, oh, that thing's made in Japan, a piece of junk. And Hondas were tiny little bubbly cars. They looked like fish tanks and fish bowls. Cadillacs, and everything was big. There was no small car in the US. But once gas prices went up, people migrated. No longer buy American or any of that stuff. They migrated pretty freely. And it almost wiped out the US auto industry in the 70s, in the 80s. It was teetering, the cars were horrible. The US car industry really only recovered in the 90s when gas prices started to go down again. And they actually started to make decent looking cars again. What's the other one? My other example. These cars.
Paris tasting.
The Paris tasting, yeah, of course. And that's a great example. Because do you remember why the French invaded the US there?
They're gonna destroy them.
To humiliate them. Yeah, they invited them there on the bicentennial, the US bicentennial, for the sole purpose of humiliating them. And what happened? We know what happened. If you read the book, or if you saw, what was the movie called? Bottle Shock, yeah. So you know, these things happen. The laws of supply and demand always win over whatever crazy philosophy you have. The idea that wine doesn't follow the laws of supply and demand, which I said I've heard a million times before in the wine industry, is wrong. It's always wrong. We pulled a SKU out of anywhere. We could pull any SKU, but I gave you guys a SKU. You looked at a scatter diagram, and what did it look like? It looked like a demand curve. And we saw that when prices were low, people bought more. When prices were high, people bought less. That's the law of demand. That's it. And remembering that and having that foundation, Cyril should have run that article by me first. And he has done that every now and again. What do you think of this? And we could have avoided, I guess we could have avoided that whole shocking cover on Wine Business Monthly. So again, I didn't do anything but graph some prices and see if this guy's model is anywhere near correct. And I didn't see it. So any questions? We're going to talk more about supply and demand because I think supply and demand underlies everything we do in business.
Was there a shortage? Did it happen like you said?
No, it didn't.
There was no shortage, there was
No.
just enough grapes.
In fact, and I'm not going to blame his shortage not happening on his bad model, which it is bad, but there was a recession right after that, and there was actually a surplus. We ended up with a surplus of wine, a surplus of grapes. So people were buying, and this happened a couple of years ago. I know a guy in Hollywood that has been making wine for years, and a couple of years ago he said St. Helena Cap grape growers were calling him and calling this one guy who makes wine in his garage in Los Angeles if he wanted to buy a couple, truckloads of grapes. This is Napa Valley Cap, and he's like, wow, those prices. Yeah, he did. He drove down and got a flatbed and loaded up and went back to Hollywood and made wine in the Hollywood Hills. So yeah, there's fluctuations. I wrote another article about grape price fluctuations, and there's a cycle. So there's a way to model that.
Basic question.
Yeah.
Scarcity, is that where willingness to pay just becomes ability to pay and it's still in the same demand line curve?
Yeah, willingness to pay implies ability to pay.
Okay, so we're still seeing it on the same line.
Yeah, so let's assume that everyone that has a willingness to pay has the ability to pay. So,
So
nobody-
Screaming Eagle being up there way at the top, and there's serious desire for it, but we can still interpret it on the same demand curve because
and it
only
would be
so
a
many
different demand.
people
Yeah,
are.
it would be a different demand. And we can break up demand so this is Napa. We can break up demand by price segments, and we know wine is broken up by price segments, and we can break up grapes by price segments, so that we know that some of these grapes are different than some of these grapes are different than some of these grapes, and here's your Screaming Eagle over here. But like I said, the St. Helena Cap grapes, they were just trying to get rid of them. So And this happens all the time. A bad forecast can kill you. What happened to Treasury? How many years ago was that? Treasury had to write off, is it $300 million of wine? Nobody follows the wine industry?
Yeah.
What'd they do?
They had to get rid of a bunch of old wine.
But what'd they do?
That wouldn't sell.
They got a tractor, they got the pallets, they lifted it up, and then they moved, they just dumped it over. They had to literally smash $300 million worth of wine and write it off because of a bad forecast, because their forecasters were bad. Anyone here work for Treasury? Okay. You know Victoria Snyder? She's the head of pricing. So, in the middle of all this stuff, they needed an expert to come in and do their forecasting, because apparently whoever they had doing it was not an expert. So I came in towards the end of that. So, but that was a big deal. I mean, they literally just they showed kind of the what do you call those things that lift stuff? Forklifts, yeah, they showed the forklifts, and they're literally smashing bottles of wine. It wasn't bad wine. I mean, it didn't go bad. It just, they couldn't sell it. They overestimated. Bad price forecast. What's that?
Damaged reputation, right? It's
Yeah.
more
it's,
than
it's just, but
3 million.
it's costly. It's bad all around, which is why we're kind of relying on fundamentals of supply and demand. We're making forecasts, constructing margins of error, and this isn't things that they do. The wine industry is, some of the most sophisticated analytics in the wine industry is done in Excel, and rarely does it move into Stata. So some of my students are now working for Treasury, doing forecasting and stuff like that, but they still won't let them use Stata and do an actual forecast. They still have to do kind of spreadsheet-based stuff. So, and it's really unfortunate. They're bringing in more people. I just heard today another one of my students got offered a job there. So, yeah, you'd think a multi-billion-dollar multinational company would have top-notch analytics. But it's typical of the wine industry. The wine industry doesn't do things the way that other industries do. So, all right, that was my article. I enjoyed writing it. I still enjoy reading it. It still makes me laugh. So, questions of the homework? Yeah. M.
Yeah, I think mine's pretty wrong.
Pretty wrong.
Yeah.
You got a pretty wrong M. Now, refresh my
Revenue maximizing.
right. Yeah, that one was, revenue maximizing. Oh, okay. Yeah, essentially, I think the answer that I'll accept is which one of those prices generates the most revenue.
So on that table.
Yeah, I think that's an answer, but there's a different answer that requires a little bit of algebra. And so we'll see. I'll see what the key says.
Okay, so just my thought process. So I did a command we did in class.
Mhm.
The sum of price if prod equals class fit, or I don't know how to say that word. I would do boy or whatever that word is.
Something like that.
Classics.
Yeah.
Okay. And I did that for cases as well. And it
Mhm.
gave you like a percentage of each one. And I took the 50% on the price and the 50% on the cases. And I just kind of made it equilibrium. So I don't know if that's right or not.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
But that's so the kind of the technical way of doing this is that you should have been able to generate a revenue function that looks like that.
Yeah, I do.
It's a quadratic revenue function. And this will relate to the demand curve.
Okay. That one.
And if you find this quantity, you'll be able to find that price. That's pretty, nobody did that, right?
What?
You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
This?
So, it's not a bell curve, it's a quadratic function.
It is a curving thing.
What's that?
It is a curving thing, but it's not a bell curve.
Yeah, yeah. It's a different kind of curve, it's just a quadratic function. And that's the true optimal, given your demand curve, that'll give you your optimal price.
Yeah.
There's a couple other ways to do it.
So how do you get to an arithmetic?
This is how you do it mathematically. Yeah. So essentially, you have to take your demand function, multiply it through by quantity, and you get a quadratic function that'll look exactly like that. And then you can either use calculus or you can just kind of eyeball that spot there. It's one question out of 75 or whatever it is that comes to it. But I think I started accepting the simpler answer.
How much was the extra credit worth?
Yeah, 1 million points out of the total of 1 trillion. So, I don't know. I think I might make it worth one problem set if out of the we're gonna have like 16 of them, right? We have one every week, so it'll be 1/16 of your grade, or something like that. So it'll be, it'll help. It'll help. Anyone do it? Did everyone do it?
Right.
Did you?
Yeah, I'm trying to get as much as I can.
Basically, I just want to introduce you to Tableau.
Yeah, let's just use that.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, would you like to use Tableau more?
Yes.
Yeah.
You've already maxed out our learning curve. Let's stick with it.
Yeah,
But it's
and again,
easier.
that's why I introduced it when I did, because I felt we had kind of maybe gotten over the hump with Stata, maybe not. It really, what Tableau would have really been nice was those first 3 homeworks when we were building benchmarks, and we had different benchmarks. We had means, we had moving averages, we had the regression, and we can kind of compare all those interactively. That would have been really nice, but there's no way I was going to introduce one after another. Excel, Stata, Tableau. Basically 1 week of Excel, 1 week Stata, 1 week Tableau, because that's those first 3 homeworks. That I knew wasn't gonna work. So I waited. Yeah, I waited. And so. Any other questions? So don't shortchange the theory. You're going to be amazed by how much theory you need to know, and that's good to have. And it really is common sense. A lot of it is common sense. Right? Law of demand is common sense. But there are, like I said, there are a lot of people that don't think it exists. So, especially in the wine industry. All right, so let's move on. Real quick. Niners got 3. All right. We're moving.
Just a quick question on Tableau.
Mm-hmm.
When I tried to do a couple of the graphs, just to try to understand it, it put its own numbers on the X and Y axis that it defined for
Yeah.
itself, and then it would show my graph. How do I get, and then I would check the domain, because you could do that, and it would be like 9 to 12.
Yeah.
Tableau will put it from 0 to 150, so my graph is.
So it's that big and yeah, a bunch of
right.
white space, yeah.
So how do I change that?
It's a lot like what you can do with Excel. I think if you right click on the axes, it'll give you the option to set the range, set the value. So it's similar to Excel in that fashion. And yeah, it has. Anyone else have that problem? That seems like usually it sets the range closer to what the data is.
That's what I expected, so when I
Yeah,
plopped it in there.
because Excel does that.
Right.
The Stata does that. So, but you can definitely define it. Yeah, there's a learning curve with Tableau. It might be early. Did I exceed my time? Is it time to go already? Is anyone going to take the second half of this class?
Oh my gosh.
No one from this class. Okay, just. They're offering the second half of it.
That's
Second.
business analytics.
Advanced business analytics.
Is that gonna be also data too?
It's gonna be a lot like what we're, data driven. What's that?
My answer is no. I saw that up there. I was hoping it's gonna be Excel stuff.
That's the opposite of advanced. It's primitive. It's primitive business analytics.
I don't know.
So, yeah, and I'm gonna use overhead projector with those plastic
Transparency.
transparencies and.
How come most analytics use Excel over it?
Most analytics that you know.
Well, no, most analytics in general, and I have done a little bit of research, job searches on who's using Stata.
Well, I can tell you this, that nobody that does advanced analytics uses Excel. It's just, that's not what it's built for. It's a spreadsheet. It's not designed for analytics. It's.
I see the value of the Stata on the Excel guy.
Yeah. But I don't know what jobs you're looking at, but I can tell you that outside of the wine industry, nobody doing analytics uses Excel.
Yeah.
There's Stata, there's R, which is a free version of not a free version, it's a different version of, it's a different analytics package. There's SAS, there's SPSS. But the firms I've worked with, and I've worked with quite a few, yeah, I'd say the opposite. None of them use Excel other than for spreadsheets. I use Excel. I use Excel to keep your guys' grades.
I'm doing a search on Indeed right now in San Francisco. There's
Yeah.
not a ton of positions looking for people with Stata experience.
No, it's it'll be R,
That's because the
Stata.
people that use Stata are hired and they're staying on it.
Yeah, so it's
The impression that I got was that small to medium businesses use R because it's open
free.
software,
and it's free.
and like Kaiser or Gallo would use Status.
Yeah.
It's expensive, so maybe it's that much more robust, but it's super expensive.
Like Oracle Crystal Ball.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah, and that's kind of a forecaster thing. And there's a difference between analytics and kind of database management, SQL and doing Excel. It just isn't used. It's I can tell you companies: Facebook, Amazon, eBay, Microsoft, the Gap, Levi's.
Excel is really limited by its size.
Its size and its functionality, yeah. So and Excel is supposed to increase its capacity to unlimited or a million, but it still doesn't. So, yeah, you're looking at the wrong jobs. So, but yeah, the people I know that are doing analytics are using Stata. So if nobody in this class, it must be from another class. But we'll see.
I feel like I'd have to take a stats class to really excel, to go further.
Yeah, and we kind of cover, I guess, seeing more stats. I guess the idea is you get better at it. But whether we do it in Stata or Excel, you're still gonna have to have the stats behind it. It's just Excel is like using a pair of pliers. It can do a lot of things, it just doesn't do it well. It's gonna strip bolts, it's gonna get scraped knuckles, it's not fun to fix your car with a pair of pliers. It's nice to have a set, the right tools for the right job. And Excel is a pair of pliers. It's designed for spreadsheets, it does spreadsheets well. Outside of that, it doesn't do, multiple regression, for example, the stuff we're doing here. You know, set up dummies, seasonal dummies, monthly dummies, and stay to run a regression with those dummies, see how long it takes versus IDOT. You know, all timing, I got my timer on here. For any of you Excel ninjas, as they call them. So. All right, so let's go to this. Let's expand our model a bit. Basically, we're doing the same thing, we're estimating demand. But we're moving beyond a simple regression, which you can do in Excel easily, to multiple regression, which you can also do in Excel. And we're accounting for some of that seasonality. So law of demand still holds, it's still the demand curve, still doing all the same stuff. Our coefficient on price is still how quantity demand responds when price changes by a unit. When Treasury was going through its issue, this is what they wanted to know. Because they wanted to get rid of that wine. But they didn't, you don't want to lower price too much and just kind of lose money. They ended up losing money anyways. But you don't want to lower price not enough and not get rid of that $300 million worth of wine. So trying to find out how much I can change price by and get rid of a specific quantity. So here's their demand curve. Let's say that here was the quantity that they produced. Here is the price. And here is the quantity that they're sold. So let's call this supply, and this is demand. This is surplus. That's the $300 million worth of wine that they were stuck with. What they wanted to know, before they pulled out the those things you drive, what do they call the forklifts, before they pulled out the forklifts, they wanted to try to get rid of the wine. So they wanted to estimate a demand curve, boom, and they wanted to know what? They wanted to know this price. That price would get rid of their surplus, right? Again, they could have kind of guessed anywhere near here, but one, they're already in deep trouble. Right? You don't want to price too high and not get rid of it. You don't want to price too low and kind of lose money. Lower price lower than it has to be, right? Why lower price more than you need to? So that's what they needed to do. Now, Treasury is a multi-billion-dollar, multinational corporation. And they do their pricing analytics in Excel. So for those of you that want to use Excel, this is what happens. You end up doing bad forecasts. Now, they ended up just trashing it, but that's what they wanted to do. And it relies on, first, the fundamental theorem of the law of demand. And then after that, can we estimate that thing? Yeah.
Why do they trash it?
Why did they trash the
It
wine?
seems like they can do like a marketing thing, just give it away, and be more beneficial.
Give it to poor people or
Yeah.
do something? Yeah.
They don't have a party.
Yeah, exactly.
Employee and friends discount.
They ended up just writing it off. I mean, they can ask the Treasury.
No comment.
You know, comment. They ended up just writing it off They're,
Cause they can write
they're,
off the
they're,
retail
what's
price,
that?
right? They can write off the retail price versus blow it out for like.
Yeah, and you know, it was bad, they, up until they bought some wineries from Diageo, was it Diageo they just bought?
Yeah.
Up until then, they thought they were gonna be swallowed up by somebody. They were actually shopping, I don't know if this is top secret or not, but from what I heard, is they were actually shopping Behringer and some of their big, you know, Behringer's their crown jewel, so. Yeah, so they ended up trashing this, but, this is what they wanted to do. Now, can you do this, and this is the model you gotta use, right? You wanna account for the things that you should account for in a demand equation. What are those things? Those are those things you learn in Principles of Microeconomics. It's those really simple things that we talked about last week, the factors that affect demand that you should account for. And we can account for these things. We can get a measure of income. You know, we got prices, obviously. That should be negative. This is our income effect, right? This is how demand changes when income changes. The wine that they were getting rid of was at the lower end. Was it their, it was the, what's the name of that wine?
Too much set.
No, that's, Trans.
St. Jean, Shawshank St. Jean.
No, St. Jean's not the, this was this was at the lower end. They have a line that's called, that's the one. But the income effect, we know, can be either positive or negative. It's positive for a normal good, and it's negative for an inferior good. Normality and inferior, as we said, is defined solely by its relationship to income. If, as income goes up, we buy more of something, that's a normal good. If, as our income goes up, we buy less of that thing, that's an inferior good. And it's good to know that. If we expect a recession, and you're an inferior good, then that's a good thing. If you expect a recession and you're a normal good, that's a bad thing. Right? So we all remember the whole trading down thing. You know, people trading down from one price point to the next. One of the best papers on trading down phenomena is, I forgot the author's name, but it'll come to me later. Price of competitors. So this is how our demand changes when the price of one of our competitors changes. And that should be positive. What's that? Go ahead.
And I found this interesting, this is actually like, this is really interesting.
Oh, okay.
I'm not good enough for the upper divisions of the class, but this is interesting.
This is good enough, huh? All right.
So this, as your competitor lowers or increases their price, is gonna affect your demand.
Yeah, so think about it, always think in terms of the law of demand. And let's start with the competitor. If the law of demand is true, when my competitor raises its price, what does my competitor's consumers do? They buy less. If they're buying less of your competitor, they may buy more of your stuff. So when their price goes up, my demand goes up. I'm stealing some of their consumers.
Well, wouldn't that be dependent on what kind of good? If it's a luxury good and an increased price or something indicates, I don't know, superiority or that it's a higher quality or something?
But we're not talking about two different goods, we're talking about the same good raising its price. So even if it's a Rolex, right, if the price of Rolexes go up, Rolex consumers will buy less.
What if they just open up into a whole new segment of market people?
That's different though, that's a different market.
Okay.
And by definition, you use the term market, by opening up a different segment of market, that would be a different demand curve.
Just another curve.
It's a different demand curve entirely.
Okay.
It's a different market. Just like, you know, we talked about before, the market for 911s is different than the market for Boxsters. One of them's a real Porsche, one of them's a girl love. He said it, not me. It's on tape, he said it. But I've seen guys drive Boxers. And the size of that coefficient tells you, how much, so you can try to model what's gonna happen with your competitor. If you know your competitor's gonna lower price, you can try to see what's gonna happen to your demand.
So if the coefficient, I mean, what kind of size would you expect?
We'll talk about that in a second, so. Because as we know, size always matters. The other thing in there was just the seasonal variation. We know that's always gonna be part of wine. Wine is highly seasonal. And I didn't put a slide in there for seasonal variation, so. But we've been dealing with, the first thing we did in this class was monthly dummies, so we know, right, there's gonna be some seasonality. And we should account for those things. Those things are shifters of demand.
And
Demand goes up.
that's that summation 12 to 2, that's your dummy shift?
Instead of writing 11 dummies, I'm just using some cool, fancy notation to try to scare you. It's working, yeah. So, but remember, we didn't, for 12 months, we put 11 dummies. And kind of the default for Stata was to throw out the first one, so we get months 2 through 12. But we can change that default month to any month we want. Have we done that? We should do that. It's fine. Thorough. All right, brand loyalty. Yeah, I did some not Wikipedia, but some Google searches of myself, just to get a definition of brand loyalty. So I looked at the American Marketing Association, Investopedia, and BusinessDictionary.com. All highly respected, other than the American Marketing Association. I've never heard of the other ones, but perhaps you have. So how do we define brand loyalty? A situation in which the consumer generally buys the same manufacturer's originated product or service repeatedly over time, rather than buying from multiple suppliers. The degree to which a consumer consistently purchases the same brand within a product class. Yeah, that makes sense. Investopedia, when consumers become committed to your brand and make repeated purchases over time, brand loyalty is the result of consumer behavior. There's a good term there. And is affected by personal preferences. Again, what we talked about. Loyal customers will consistently purchase from their preferred brands, regardless of convenience or price. That bothers me. Regardless of price? I've got, my favorite brands of wine, and I really buy local. I live in Glen Ellen, so I buy Glen Ellen wines. And I've got a good selection of them. Chateau St. Jean is right down the street, even though it's Treasury. St. Francis is for Zinn. I got Kundi, I got B.R. Cohen, I got Benziger. I've got a good selection of wines. What determines what I buy from the, Glen Ellen's got, those are just the ones off the top of my head. There's plenty more wineries in Glen Ellen. And I like to buy local, and I buy in concentric circles. Sometimes I'll go outside I'll buy outside of Glen Ellen, I'll buy Sonoma, I'll buy Napa, but I tend to like to buy local ones. But not irrespective of price. There's a difference between price insensitive or brand loyalty and brand stupidity. I'm not going to buy irrespective of price. I might be less price sensitive, but it's not going to be irregardless. So that's a bad, they were doing well until that very end.
Do you think it depends on the product itself? That it could be regardless of price?
No.
Like clothing or shoes or watches or something, people are willing to pay more for a product they perceive as higher quality. So
Yeah.
you're gonna pay $100 for some workout pants because you feel like they're better than $20.
Do you have a particular
ones.
brand in mind?
Like the Lululemon.
Yeah. Are those the ones that you could see through? Those the ones that were?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm all for those. Now, here's what you're kind of confusing. You're confusing, moving up a price segment because you perceive it to be better
Okay.
versus looking at a product and analyzing the effective prices on that product. So, like I said before, Lululemon, if Lululemon could raise its price irrespective, and consumers would buy irrespective of price, how much should they charge for a pair of yoga pants?
Millions.
They charge, if you're
$80 billion.
You're gonna buy.
Why stop at $1 million?
Right, well,
$1 billion.
whatever you want.
Exactly. So the law of demand is going to hold for a product. Now, we're going to get to some of this stuff. For broader products, the answer is no. The law of demand is always going to hold. You just have to believe it. It's always going to hold. During the dot-com bubble, the big thing back then was, the tech industry doesn't obey the laws of supply and demand. Tech industry was different. And what happened there? We saw what happened there, the bubble. Real estate prices speculators tend to say, prices are never gonna go down. But they do go down.
Tagging a little bit on what she said, what about like, fan things, people sign,
Mhm.
sign clothes or sign records, and then they auction it, and, I don't know, Elvis's hair or
Yeah,
something, I don't know,
yeah.
these crazy things, like, what about those kind of items?
Yeah, and they tend, but even those things, what is a lock of Elvis's hair go for?
I don't know.
There is a ceiling. People will not continue to buy for infinity, like the auction ended. If there was,
He's probably only got one hair.
if like I said, irrespective of price, then that would mean an auction would start and never end because people would continue to bid until the sky's the limit. But they
Yeah.
do stop at a point where somebody says, no, I'm not gonna pay that much.
So the law of demand is gonna depend on, the shape of the demand curve. Steeper demand curve means consumers are more price inelastic. A flatter demand curve means they're gonna be a little bit more price sensitive. So this is why we estimate demand curves. So we can answer these exact questions for particular products. So let's draw a flat demand curve. And let's draw a relative, that's not perfect. No, I don't want it perfect. That actually looks perfect. I want some slope to it. How's that? So let's analyze a price, P0. Let's analyze these two firms, and let's call this firm A and this firm B. Let's analyze these two firms' ability to raise price. All right? One of the first things we got to recognize is if we're going to raise price, what do we have to do? What do we have to do first? Raise the price. And what do we?
Change it on the billboard,
We've got to do this first.
determine the new quantity.
You have to make it more scarce.
You've got to make it more scarce. Exactly. You've got to make it more scarce. Once we make things more scarce, then we can jack up price. So let's go to here, to here. Now, look at the demand for product B. They can raise price to P1B. And look at the demand for product A. They can raise price to P1A. So demand's not the same for every product. It's not the same for products within the same category. Some people are loyal to Porsche, some people to BMW, some people to Mercedes, some to Lexus, but it doesn't mean they're gonna purchase those cars irrespective of price. The most expensive Porsche 911 Turbo S convertible is about $200,000.
Or the 918.
Well, 918 is $1 million, but there's like 5 of them made a year, right? It's an electronic car, kind of like what's the other electronic thing? The Tesla, but really cool. And it's really fast, but I think it only has a capacity of like 19 miles or something like that. So my plan for that is if I can get it to a club and then to a motel right after the club, then that's all I'm
65.
I just saw an advertisement for a and maybe you can Google this while you're looking at your other Excel job.
What's that?
I just saw an advertisement for a market analyst for Audi. Audi's making an aggressive push in that market segment. They've really redesigned their cars, they're nice. Iron Man drives the R8. You know, that's kind of a sideways effect. Wouldn't you like to see what the effect on Audi sales of Iron Man driving an R8? Right? Not everyone can go out and afford an R8, but you can buy a cheaper version of an Audi and say, well, it's an Audi, it's the same thing Iron Man drives. Well, the R8's a really cool V10.
It's an XL version of the Audi, right?
Yeah, it's, but, yeah, so what they want to do is this. They want to do exactly this, and they want that regression up there. They want the regression that was up there. They want BMW, they want Porsche, and they want Mercedes up there so they can see, okay, how are we going to compare with our main competitors? I guarantee you it won't be done in Excel.
Would addictive products like cigarettes or drugs follow the demand?
Yep.
Follow demand?
Yep.
Really?
Yep. It's a brilliant paper on addictive products by, I mean, because that question comes up all the time. So, and the reason you do this because there's been papers on cocaine, marijuana, pretty much every product you can think of. PhD dissertations, they're always looking for ideas, and they'll do some of this stuff. So, but yeah, law of cigarettes, for example, follow the law of demand. So people don't smoke until cigarettes are. What's a pack of cigarettes cost?
Like
$5? $6? Yeah, so $6. If it was, if we all agree cigarettes are addictive, right? If the demand was perfectly inelastic, what, $6? Does that seem exorbitant? That's really cheap. That's really cheap. And it turns out one of the best ways to reduce teen smoking is simply to raise the price. Teens are the most price sensitive because they got the least income. You stop them early, and they probably won't pick up the habit later. So, yeah. Let's go back to this one. Extent of the faithfulness of consumers to a particular brand, yes. Expressed through a repeated purchase, yes. Everyone else says that. Irrespective of the marketing pressure generated by the competing brands. The irrespective parts are just troubling me. They're too definitive. Think of your favorite product, and are you that price insensitive? Probably not. Probably not. We're all price sensitive. Double log regression. Well, we've introduced log regression. So this is double log regression. It's twice as cool. And the cool thing about double log regression is that, so here's a double log regression. Double log just means we have logs on both sides of the equality sign. Notice we got the log of Q, which we've already done to find growth rates. But now we've got the log of the X's also, except for the monthly growths. And once we run these double log regressions, it changes the interpretation of our coefficients into these things called elasticities. Every firm wants to try to find an elasticity. I've done quite a few elasticity studies, and almost nobody knows exactly what elasticity is. When I show up, they always give me a Wikipedia definition.
You said it changes the coefficients,
It changes the interpretation of the coefficients
the interpretation.
to elasticities, yeah.
Is it still like,
So let's see. Let's go and see what an elasticity is. So beta 1 is still going to be negative. It should still obey the law of demand. But now look at the interpretation. Remember when we were able to interpret the log regression as a percentage growth rate? Now this is a percentage over percentage, So it basically says for every 1% increase in price, what's the percentage decrease in quantity demanded? That's what a price elasticity is. It's for every 1% increase in price, we're gonna lose beta 1%, we're gonna have a beta 1% decrease in quantity demanded.
Oh, that's what the other one meant.
No, those are unit changes.
Okay.
That's for every $1, we'll lose this many cases.
Oh.
Now, by putting it into percentages, we can now compare this across products with different case volumes, for example. And now we can, this is literally called the price elasticity of demand. And it's categorized into greater than 1 or less than 1 in absolute value. Remember, it's always negative. If it's greater than 1, consumers are elastic. That is, they're going to be sensitive to price changes. They're going to be sensitive to price changes. Let's think of that as more like this demand curve. Change prices by 1%, you're going to get more than a 1% decrease in quantity demanded. And that's what that really is, right? Because if you change price by 1% and you get more than a 1% decrease in quantity demanded, then you got a small number going into a big number, and that's going to be greater than 1. If, on the other hand, price elasticity of demand is less than 1 in absolute value, consumers are considered price inelastic or unresponsive to price changes. Doesn't mean they don't respond, it just means they're not that sensitive. So you would have a 1% increase in price, and consumers decrease quantity demanded by less than 1%. So that ratio is less than 1 in absolute value. And that's how you estimate price elasticity of demand. If Treasury or you or anyone else was to call Nielsen, they have a consulting service too, McKinsey, Bain, Accenture, and if you were to ask them, I want you to estimate my price elasticity of demand, what do you think a average price would be? Of something we're going to do in this class.
Well, an average price.
Of having a consulting firm come in and estimate the price elasticity of demand.
$100,000.
How much?
$100,000.
Pretty close. That's on the low end. About $150,000, $200,000 to come in and probably not use Excel to estimate a price elasticity of demand. So it's really expensive.
Based on how much they're assessing, correct? Like if it's gonna be really expensive if you do it for Kaiser versus not so expensive if you do it for the Red Grape.
Yeah, they engage in a little bit of price discrimination, but they would probably still charge the Red Grape $100,000 and maybe Kaiser $500,000, $300,000, something like that. It's just the way it works. So our coefficient on income is now our income elasticity. We said it was positive for normal goods, negative for inferior goods. And if income elasticity is positive and greater than 1, which it probably will be if it's greater than 1, that's considered a luxury good. Is it just me or am I hallucinating? What do you call it when you hallucinate smell? Hungry? Yeah. So luxury goods are defined as goods for which small increases in income result in big increases in purchases. But the opposite's true. Small decreases in income, you're unloading stuff. Right? And things like Rolexes and those kinds of things. First thing you do when you hit the lotto, what's the first thing you do? Invest it. What's the first thing the rest of us do? Yeah, you quit your job, you get the Ferrari, you get the Rolex, and yeah. Well, yeah, you get the Rolex.
Go to KFC and buy everything.
Yeah, you get the extra crispy bucket instead of the regular bucket. So,
Or the fresh laundry.
or the French laundry, yeah. So they sell buckets of chicken there too?
Are they open again?
Actually, they give you donuts for dessert.
They do?
They just closed it in December
Yeah.
to get your menu.
So income elasticity is again something that is usually estimated along with these things. Although they'll charge you extra for it.
Something have to do with their lines or something, like rebuild it or something or something?
And then we have our substitute good. And that's referred to as a cross price elasticity. And it measures the substitutability between two goods. So for a 1% increase in my competitor's price, how much, how big of a boost am I gonna get percentage-wise in my demand? Or vice versa. If my competitor lowers price by 1%, how much are they gonna, what percentage of my sales are they gonna take away? Alrighty. So we're gonna estimate all this stuff. Here's our dummies. And now we're gonna interpret our dummies kind of in the same way. For when month K equals 1, when that dummy equals 1, it's now the percentage increase in sales for that month. So in December, in October, in November, what's the percentage boost in sales instead of the unit increase in sales, which we've been looking at, right? Notice we don't take the log of the dummies. Dummies are 0, 1, so we don't take the log. So in our, so we probably have the same interpretation of the dummies in our tasting room.
So this is the percentage increase in sales relative to the other month?
Correct, relative to the base month.
Okay.
Got that? Yeah. Relative to our base month.
Or being 0?
And our base month has generally been the first month, January. So how much do sales change relative to January? In this month. Price elasticity of demand. All right, we talked about price elasticity of demand. There's our little formula equation thing. And again, that's just the coefficient on price in our regression. And when we measure, one of the reasons I brought in brand loyalty is the way you measure brand loyalty is by the price elasticity of demand. That's how brand loyalty is measured. How responsive are consumers to a change in price, change in your price? That's why price elasticities are important. We can compare different brands. We can compare the strength of different brands by comparing their price elasticities. If consumers are relatively insensitive, at least compared to one of your competitors, then you've got more brand loyal customers. So what do we know about price elasticities? Products are more inelastic than brands. That is, the demand for wine is more inelastic than the demand for any particular brand of wine, right? Price of Old Vines Inn, St. Francis Old Vines Inn goes up, I buy Dry Creek Old Vines Inn, right? I can substitute pretty easily from brand to brand. But when the price of all wines go up, what are my options? Switch to beer, something else. So products in general are more inelastic than brands. Oh yeah, here's a good, so the demand for cars has been estimated for at about 1.71 in absolute value. But the demand for Chevrolets is estimated at 4. Why? Because the price of Chevrolets go up, I could switch to Buick or Pontiac or one of the other brands. But the price of cars overall, I'm less likely to switch to riding the bus or walking or riding my bike or doing something. So when you think about, estimates of the demand for wine, the price elasticity of wine, that doesn't mean that's your wine. It means the entire demand for wine, the market for wine. Estimated price elasticity of wine is 1.23. I should have put it. Well, we're going to do a brand, so. Factors affecting the price elasticity of the domain. My favorite, substitutability. In the end, it's all about substitutability. The availability of substitutes for the product. Everything is substitutable. It may not be a perfect substitute, may not even be a good substitute, but everything is substitutable. There's substitutes for everything. So what the people in Napa didn't realize when they thought they can continue raising prices and nothing's going to happen. People will stop drinking Napa wine, and the demand will go back down. Think of two relatively close substitutes, Coke and Pepsi. Two pretty well-named brands, well-known brands. And gasoline, which is a substitute that, so we got two things that are easily substitutable, Coke and Pepsi, even though I'm not a big fan of Pepsi, but, and gasoline is really hard to substitute. But we know the demand for gasoline is not perfectly inelastic. We just said the price of gasoline is cheap right now. What do we see? Price elasticity of Coke, 1.78. I'm sorry, 1.71. Price elasticity of Pepsi, 2.08. It's going to be on the test. Yeah.
So Coke is slightly more sticky than Coke. People are willing to pay slightly a little bit.
Coke consumers are more loyal than Pepsi consumers. But that makes sense too, right?
How would this work if like your brand is the product? Like let's say like the NFL.
Yeah.
Like their brand is like the Raiders is their brand, right?
Yeah.
So would it still work the same way?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, the price of NFL tickets is expensive, but it's not.
So like you can use that number and kind of determine like if Pepsi is going to sell at this price this week, we here at Coke we can charge just slightly more according to the statistic. Like calculate how much more we'd be able to charge more than Pepsi without losing our customer base and enjoy that profit.
And the NFL, which you think has no, and the NFL is a really good example that you bring up because they are fighting the loss of attendees at games.
Yeah.
And I think I saw on one of the games that I think it's, they're doing everything to try to get people to go to games. The Jacksonville Jaguars, I think, have a swimming pool in the stadium that you can sit in and watch the game. What's that?
The Diamondbacks do too.
What are the Diamondbacks?
They have.
That's baseball, really? And where's that?
Arizona.
Arizona? Yeah, so, yeah, they're trying to get you to bring your kids and, you know, sit in the pool and watch the game. They've got childcare areas in NFL stadiums now. So, you know, if we can just get around to having people get beat up in the bathroom, at Levi Stadium, you know, they could probably get people to go in there, so. It used to be people were afraid to go to the Raider games. Now, Raider fans are afraid to go to Levi Stadium.
Right.
It's,
Actually, Levi Stadium is really easy to fill if you just have Taylor Swift there every weekend.
yeah.
You
Then you
really
gotta listen
well.
to Taylor Swift.
Really well when she was there.
So yeah, there's a whole field of sporting analytics that are outside of the analytics of the sport itself, but of estimating prices and for tickets. Now, is it? I don't know if any NFL team is doing it, but I know some college teams now have tiered pricing, so that for big games, so if it's Alabama versus Texas A&M, for example, and Texas A&M probably one of the greatest schools of all time, those tickets are going to be are expensive. But if it's Alabama versus San Jose State, then those tickets are going to be lower. So they're actually engaging in, they're estimating demands, and they're saying, okay, look, we need to get people to these games also. Sure, we can sell out the big games, but we need to fill in those ones. So they're doing what, right? The demand for Alabama isn't necessarily the demand for Alabama. Alabama versus the top 10 opponent is going to be here. You know, Alabama versus San Jose State is going to be there. So they need to kind of estimate. You can't have one price to fit every game, which is the norm, right? And that's true in the NFL. And I'm not sure if the NFL has actually approved, because tickets are set by the teams, but you got to get approval to do all this kind of stuff.
Major League Baseball's been doing that for years.
So yeah, so baseball's been doing it for years. Okay.
Dynamic pricing.
Dynamic pricing, exactly. We're gonna have a problem with dynamic
They
pricing.
do it in San Francisco parking meters now too.
Yeah.
It costs more to park during like the morning or the middle of the day than it does.
Yeah, or even on the freeway, those lanes, the high occupancy lanes.
Yeah.
On the way back to, so I go to San Jose because that's where I'm from, visit family. But they got a lane that has a digital price that when there's lots of traffic, the price to get in that lane goes up. When there's little traffic, the price goes down. It's dynamic pricing. It's called price discrimination. We're going to study that. Can we do price discrimination yet? No, we will. Gasoline, point 2, pretty inelastic. That means for every 1% increase, well, let's go back and interpret these for a second. For every 1% increase in price, quantity demanded is going to fall by 1.71%. So it's greater than 1, it's elastic, but it's not as elastic as Pepsi, right? For Pepsi, every 1% increase in price, they're going to sell 2% less Pepsis. Did I tell you about the Coke machine and the ambient temperature?
Yeah, you did.
That's awesome. That's awesome. On a hot day, the price of a Coke is more than on a cold day. So gasoline, every 1% increase in price, we buy less than 1%, 0.2% less gasoline. The other factor that affects the price elasticity of demand is, bigger ticket items relative to your income. And that makes sense too, right? We will tend to be less price sensitive on toothpicks than we will on tires, for example. You go to the store, you go to Safeway, you grab a box of toothpicks, you even look at the price? You do? How much is a box of toothpicks?
Yeah, but if there was
Just
$20, you
just
wouldn't get them.
Yeah, but the point is, if you're not even looking at the price, you're probably not even looking at whether they're inching up the price a little bit, right? So you don't even notice it.
There is a
If they were
difference.
$20, you wouldn't buy them anymore.
Where do you work? Or do you work at a toothpick?
No, but I've noticed.
You do?
Yeah, like some will have different edges and stuff, and they'll increase the price for them, so like the wood you can feel a little cheaper.
Yeah, no, for different qualities, obviously, you'll get, that's a different demand, right? So, but for given a specific quality,
Like 100 toothpicks are better be $5.
I have no idea. I haven't, I just use a matchbook cover or something.
Well, but ultimately though, when you got to the cash register, if you did ring out at like $26, you might say something.
Yeah, yeah. So we just happen to have a price elasticity of toothpicks. It's less than gasoline. Wow, what a convenience. This PowerPoint came with Microsoft Office too. It's just lucky us. Every 1% increase in price, we buy 0.1% fewer toothpicks. That makes me want to check my teeth, make sure I don't have some meat hanging out of it or something.
Does that though?
What's that?
That is elasticity, but that does it have a range or a drop-off point where, like I said, where we would see, like, let's say, I know it has to do with quantity too, and packaging and all that kind of stuff, but wouldn't there be a drop-off point at least where?
Absolutely.
Okay, how do you describe that?
We'll describe it in a bit.
Okay, very good.
Tires, price elasticity of 1.2. So we're more sensitive to the price of tires than the price of toothpicks. Mostly because toothpicks are really cheap. What's going on over there? Questions?
Yeah, how is it calculated? I mean, where is this data coming from? Like, where are they pulling the?
Other economists. Yeah. So I didn't do all these things. I did the wine one. The wine's from the Coke and Pepsi one was done from an economist at USC. He was at USC at one time. I think he might have moved. Yeah, but yeah, there's price elasticity. Price elasticity is pretty much everywhere.